All right, so you sent over a whole stack of slides all about sensation and perception.
Yeah.
Looks like we're taking a deep dive into how our brains actually like make sense of the world.
Mm,
And get this, it says that we're basically all living in our own little simulations, like constantly being built by our brains.
that's right.
Crazy, right?
It really is. I mean, think about it. Everything that you experience, like from the taste of your morning coffee or even, feeling the sun on your skin,
Mm-hmm.
that's just your brain's interpretation of electrical signals.
So it's not even just that our senses are like picking up all this information.
Right.
It's that our brains are literally creating our own realities,
Yeah.
based on all those signals.
Yeah,
That's a lot of responsibility for our brains.
it is. And that's really where the whole, difference between sensation and perception comes in.
Okay.
Sensation is all about the raw data, like the light that's hitting your eyes or the vibrations that are in your ears.
Yeah. Okay.
But perception, that's where all the magic happens. Our brains take that raw data and they weave it into a coherent story,
Mm-hmm.
and they add all this meaning, context, and even emotions to it.
Oh, okay, I'm starting to see how this is getting a lot more complex.
Yeah.
So walk me through this. How does my brain take something physical like sound waves
Right.
and turn it into like the experience of listening to my favorite music?
Okay, well, it all starts with, specialized cells that are called sensory receptors.
Yeah.
They're kind of like these tiny little antennas that are tuned to pick up very specific kinds of energy.
Okay.
So in your ears, you have these tiny little hair cells that vibrate when sound waves hit them.
Oh, so these hair cells are like the first point of contact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those vibrations actually trigger a whole chain reaction.
Okay.
They transform the mechanical energy of those sound waves into electrical signals.
Mm-hmm.
And those signals can then travel along these nerve pathways to your brain.
To the brain.
Yeah, that's called transduction.
Transduction, got it. So it's like our senses speak one language and then our brains speak another. So transduction is like the translator, that's converting those sensory messages into brain-friendly code.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And then once those signals reach the brain, that's when perception really kicks in.
Yeah, okay.
Different parts of your brain process different types of sensory information,
Oh.
like color and shape, movement, meaning,
Oh, okay. So let's talk about, how much of a stimulus we need to even notice it.
Sure.
I remember the slides were mentioning thresholds.
Oh, yes.
It's like there's a minimum level of input that's required, before our brains even register that something is there.
Absolutely. Think of it like a dimmer switch.
Okay.
If that light is too low, you don't see anything.
Right.
So that's your absolute threshold. It's the minimum intensity of a stimulus that's needed for you to detect it at least half of the time.
At least half the time.
Yeah.
So it's not like a guarantee.
Right. Because our sensitivity can fluctuate, depending on a lot of different factors like fatigue or background noise.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So signal detection theory actually helps to explain this a bit more.
Okay.
It says that there's not just this single magic number for thresholds.
Okay.
It depends on our expectations too, and even our own biases.
So like if I'm expecting a phone call,
Right.
I might think I hear it ring even if it doesn't.
Exactly. Your brain's basically primed to detect that specific sound, so then your perception is totally influenced by what you're anticipating.
That's fascinating. All right, so we've got all this raw data coming in, but our brains are somehow managing to like make sense of it all.
Yeah.
The slides mentioned two main processes, bottom-up and top-down processing.
Yes.
Can you break those down a little?
Yeah, so imagine that you're putting a puzzle together.
Okay.
Bottom-up processing is like starting with the individual pieces,
Mm-hmm.
examining their shapes and colors. It's about analyzing those basic features of whatever the sensory input is.
So it's like our brains are just piecing together the puzzle one piece at a time.
Right. But then top-down processing is where we bring in that picture on the box.
Oh, okay.
So that's where our knowledge and memories and expectations come into play.
Okay.
And it helps us to see that bigger picture and make sense of what we're perceiving.
So bottom up is like data driven,
Right.
and then top down is more knowledge driven.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of work together to like create our perception.
Yeah, they do.
But how does our brain even decide how to organize all this information?
Well, our brains are actually wired for efficiency.
Okay.
So they look for these patterns and shortcuts,
Mm-hmm.
to try to simplify the world around us.
So it's like our brains are constantly trying to impose order on all the chaos.
Exactly. Like we group things by proximity, similarity, continuity. Our brains are always looking for those connections.
Okay, I love that it makes it way more relatable.
Yeah.
Okay, but even as the world around us is, in constant motion, our perceptions remain remarkably stable.
Right.
How does that even work?
Well, that's perceptual constancy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the most impressive feats of our whole perceptual system. I mean, just think about it. As you walk towards a building,
Mm-hmm.
its image on your retina is getting bigger,
Right.
but you don't perceive the building as growing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's size constancy.
Okay. Or how about when you look at a door from different angles?
Right.
Its shape changes, on your retina,
Yeah.
but you still just see it as a rectangle.
Right. So that's shape
The
constancy.
shape consistent.
Our brains are constantly adjusting our perceptions based on the context and our prior knowledge,
Okay.
ensuring that we experience a stable and consistent world, even when that sensory input changes.
So it's like our brains are running a background program, just to calibrate our perceptions and make sure everything stays consistent.
Exactly.
But how do we perceive depth? How do we know how far away something is?
So that's depth perception. And that relies on this really fascinating combination of cues
Okay.
from both of our eyes, binocular cues, and cues that can work even with just one eye monocular cues.
Oh, wow.
It's like our brains are getting this 3D view of the world by combining information from multiple sources.
All right, let's break those down.
All right.
What are some examples of these monocular and binocular cues?
Well, think about how a road seems to narrow in the distance,
Mm-hmm.
even though you know it's the same width all along.
Right.
So that's linear perspective, a monocular cue.
Okay.
Or how about relative size? Objects that are farther away appear smaller.
Right. And what about binocular cues? How does having two eyes help us?
Well, one key binocular cue is retinal disparity.
Okay.
Because our eyes are slightly apart,
Mm-hmm.
each one gets a slightly different view of the world.
So it's like having two cameras capturing slightly different angles.
Exactly. So our brain compares these two images to calculate the depth.
Wow.
The more different the images are, the closer the object is.
That makes sense.
Another binocular cue is convergence.
Okay.
When we look at something close, our eyes turn inward.
Right. I can feel that happening if I just focus on my finger.
Yes. And the brain uses that information about how much our eyes are converging to also judge distance.
This is crazy. It's incredible how much our brains are doing constantly without us even realizing it.
Absolutely. And, we've only just scratched the surface of this amazing world of sensation and perception.
I know this is just the beginning. There's
Yes.
so much more to explore.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to pause here for now.
Okay.
But stay tuned for part 2,
Yeah.
where we're going to delve into even more fascinating aspects of how our brains shape our reality.
It's going to be good.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time we left off talking about how our brains are like these supercomputers,
Yeah.
constantly taking in sensory data and then creating our own personal simulations of reality.
It really is an awe-inspiring process.
Okay, so if our brains are building these simulations, how do they even decide what to focus on?
Right.
We're bombarded with so much sensory information all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but there's no way we can process it all.
Right. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're right. Our brains definitely have to be selective about it. That's where attention comes in.
Okay.
It acts like a spotlight,
Okay.
highlighting the information that's the most relevant or important at any given moment.
So it's not just about what our senses pick up. It's about what we actually choose to focus on.
Exactly. And we can shift that spotlight of attention
Mhm.
consciously and unconsciously.
Okay.
So sometimes we deliberately focus on something, like when you're reading a book,
Mm-hmm.
but then a lot of times our attention is grabbed by things totally automatically,
Oh, yeah.
like a sudden loud noise or even a flash of movement.
It's like our brains are constantly scanning the environment,
Mm-hmm.
looking for anything that might be important or, potentially dangerous.
Right. That's right. It's an evolutionary adaptation.
Yeah.
It helps us to survive.
That makes sense.
And it's also why you might jump, if you hear a car horn honking nearby,
Yeah.
even if you're totally engrossed in a conversation.
Okay, so attention is really essential, for filtering out all the noise
All right.
and helping us focus on what matters.
Yeah.
But the slides also mention something called unintentional blindness.
Yeah. Have you ever been so focused on finding something
Mm-hmm.
that you totally miss something else that's right there in front of you?
Oh, all the time.
Like searching for your keys on a cluttered table
Oh.
and not noticing the bright pink Post-it note
Oh, yeah.
that's right next to them.
Yeah, is that what unintentional blindness is?
It is. It's a fascinating phenomenon that just shows how limited our attentional resources really are.
Wow.
We can become so fixated on one thing
Mm-hmm.
that we completely miss these other really obvious details.
That's wild.
There's actually a famous experiment where people watch a video of people passing a basketball,
Okay.
and they're asked to count the passes.
Hey?
But then in the middle of the video, Someone in a gorilla suit walks through the scene.
Wait, they miss a gorilla?
Yeah, a lot of people do.
Mm.
They're so focused on counting those passes
Wow.
that they totally fail to notice this, unexpected and rather large intrusion.
That's incredible. It really shows how selective our attention can be
Right?
and how easy it is to, like, miss things.
Yeah.
Even things that seem so obvious.
It really underscores the importance of being mindful and aware of our surroundings,
Yeah.
especially in situations that require our full attention, like driving.
That's a good point. Okay, so attention helps us to, like, filter all that incoming information.
Right.
But what about memory? How does what we remember even shape what we perceive?
Well, memory is like the backdrop
Okay.
against which all of our perceptions play out.
Okay.
It provides the context and the meaning.
That makes sense.
Think about how you might perceive a stranger differently
Mm-hmm.
if you met them in a library versus if you met them at a rock concert.
Yeah, that's true.
So your memory of those different environments
Right.
will shape your expectations and totally influence how you even perceive that person.
So every perception is kind of filtered through this lens of our past experiences.
Exactly. And it's not just about conscious memories either.
Oh.
Sometimes our perceptions can be influenced by implicit memories.
Right.
Things that we've experienced but might not even consciously recall.
Wow.
And those unconscious memories can still shape our perceptions and reactions
Without us realizing it.
without us even realizing it.
So it's like we're carrying around all this baggage from our past
Yeah, in a way.
that can subtly influence how we see the world.
But memory isn't just about the past.
Okay.
It also helps us to anticipate the future.
Oh.
So based on our past experiences, our brains are constantly making these predictions
About.
about what might happen next.
Okay.
And that's what allows us to do things like catch a ball, follow a conversation, or even just walk down the street without bumping into things.
So it's like our brains are constantly running simulations,
Yeah.
using our memories to predict the future and then guide our actions.
Precisely. And this predictive power of memory is really essential for our survival.
Okay.
It allows us to react quickly to potential threats and to navigate this complex and ever-changing world.
This is fascinating. But we can't forget about the role of emotions.
Right.
The slides mentioned emotional perception.
Yes.
How do our feelings even influence what we perceive?
Well, emotions act like these powerful filters.
Okay.
They color our perceptions and even shape our memories.
Okay.
Think about a time when you were feeling really happy.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are you were more likely to notice all the positive things around you and to remember that day fondly.
Right. But if I was having a bad day, I probably would have focused on all the negative stuff.
Exactly. Our emotional state can actually bias our attention,
Okay.
and it can lead us to focus on information that kind of confirms our feelings
Okay.
and then ignore the information that contradicts them.
So if I'm already feeling anxious, I might be more likely to interpret a neutral situation as, like, threatening.
Precisely. And this can create like a vicious cycle
Oh, wow.
where our anxious thoughts lead to these anxious perceptions,
Mm.
which just further fuel our anxiety.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why it's so important to be aware of our emotional state
Yeah.
and how it might be influencing our perceptions.
It's like we're all wearing these emotional glasses, that
Mhm.
color the way we see the world.
That's a great way to put it. And understanding that our perceptions aren't always objective or accurate
Right.
can be a powerful tool for personal growth and understanding.
Okay, so we've talked about attention, memory, emotions.
Yeah.
All these factors are constantly shaping our perceptions.
Hmm.
But what about all those claims of extrasensory perception, or ESP?
Right.
We touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's such a mind-boggling concept.
I know ESP has captivated the human imagination for centuries.
Yeah.
The idea that we might have these hidden senses that allow us to perceive things beyond the ordinary.
Right.
It's definitely intriguing, but despite countless studies,
Mm.
there's still no scientific consensus on whether ESP actually exists.
So it's still a total mystery.
Very much so. While some people claim to have experienced ESP phenomena like
Right.
telepathy or clairvoyance,
Right.
these experiences are often really subjective and difficult to replicate in any kind of controlled setting.
But what about all those psychics you see on TV?
Right.
Surely they must have some special abilities.
Well, there are definitely people who claim to have psychic abilities.
Yeah.
But it's important to be skeptical about it.
Okay.
A lot of so-called psychics use techniques like gold reading,
What's cold reading?
where they make these vague statements that could apply to pretty much anyone,
Oh, okay.
or they rely on information that's already publicly available.
So it's more about showmanship than actual psychic powers.
In a lot of cases, yeah. But even if ESP doesn't exist,
Mm-hmm.
in the way that it's often portrayed,
Mm-hmm.
the human mind is still capable of extraordinary things.
Yeah.
Think about like the power of intuition
Okay.
or the ability to connect with other people on this deep emotional level.
So even if we can't read minds or see the future,
Right.
there's still so much about the human mind that we just don't fully understand.
Absolutely. And that's what makes studying sensation and perception so fascinating.
Yeah.
There's always more to discover and explore.
I feel like this deep dive has really opened my eyes to how complex and wonderful our perceptual systems are.
Yeah.
But I think it's time for us to take a little break here.
Okay. So
We'll continue our exploration in part 3, where we'll
Okay.
delve even deeper into, this fascinating world of how we make sense of the world around us.
looking forward to it.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into sensation and perception. We've already uncovered so much about how our brains create our experiences.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey,
But I'm ready for even more mind-blowing insight.
but we've got plenty more to explore.
Okay, good.
Last time we were talking about how our emotions can actually shape what we see and remember.
Right.
But let's kind of shift gears a bit and talk about motion.
Okay.
So how do our brains perceive movement,
Yeah.
in the world around us?
It seems like something we just do automatically, but I
Yeah.
bet there's a lot more going on behind the scenes that we don't even realize.
You're absolutely right. Motion perception is a lot more complex than it seems at first glance.
Okay.
Like, think about watching a car drive by.
Mm-hmm.
Your brain isn't just passively registering like a change in the car's position.
Right.
It's actively calculating the speed and the direction and even predicting where the car will go next.
So it's like our brains are constantly running these mini physics simulations just to make sense of motion.
Precisely. And to make things even more challenging, our brains also have to factor in our own movements.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So like if you're walking down the street,
Mm-hmm.
that whole visual scene is shifting.
Right.
But you don't perceive the world as like spinning around you.
Right.
Your brain seamlessly adjusts for your own motion,
Okay.
allowing you to perceive the movement of other objects accurately.
That's amazing. It's like our brains are always calibrating our perceptions.
Yeah.
Just to keep things stable, even when we're the ones moving.
That's right.
But how does this all work? What cues does our brain use to detect motion?
One really important cue is the changing pattern of light and shadow on an object as it moves.
Okay.
Another one is the relative movement of an object against its background.
Okay.
Like think about watching a bird flying across the sky.
Okay.
That bird's movement is much more noticeable against that stationary background of the clouds.
So context is really important for motion perception.
Absolutely. Our brains are always looking for those patterns and relationships to help make sense of all that sensory input.
That makes sense.
And speaking of context, motion perception isn't just important for navigating our physical environment.
Okay.
It's also really crucial for our social interactions.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. How does motion perception play into our social lives?
Well, think about body language.
Okay.
Like a simple shrug or a nod, a raised eyebrow. All these subtle movements can convey a wealth of information about a person's emotions, their intentions, even their personality.
So being able to accurately perceive those movements is essential for understanding social cues
Yes.
and navigating social situations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to have a conversation with someone if you couldn't perceive their facial expressions or their body language.
Right.
It would be incredibly difficult, to interpret their tone, their emotions, or even their sincerity.
Yeah, it's amazing how much information we pick up from just those subtle movements without even consciously thinking about it.
I know. It really makes you appreciate the power of nonverbal communication.
It really does. It highlights how interconnected all of our perceptual systems are.
Yeah.
Motion perception isn't just about seeing things move. It's about understanding the world around us and our place in it.
Well said. I think that's a perfect way to kind of wrap up this deep dive,
This has been incredible. We've explored how our senses work,
Yeah.
how our brains interpret all that sensory information, and how factors like attention memory and even our emotions, shape our perceptions.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It really is. So what are some key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important takeaway is that perception is an active process.
Okay.
We're not just these passive receivers of information. Our brains are constantly working to make sense of the world.
Right.
using our past experiences, our expectations, and even our emotions to shape what we see, hear, feel, taste, and smell.
So in a way, we're all creating our own personal realities
Exactly.
based on our individual perspectives and experiences.
That's right. And that realization can be both empowering and humbling.
Yeah.
It means that we have a certain degree of control over how we perceive the world,
Mm-hmm.
but it also means that our perceptions aren't always objective or accurate.
It's a good reminder to be open to different perspectives and to challenge our own assumptions about the world.
It is. And to never stop exploring this amazing world of sensation and perception.
Well said. I think this deep dive has given us all a lot to think about.
I agree.
So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep marveling at the extraordinary abilities of your own mind.
Well said.
You might be surprised by what you discover.